Welcome to Season 5 of the Agile Brand with Greg Kilstrom, where we talk with enterprise and technology platform leaders about the people, processes, and platforms that make marketing and customer experience successful, scalable, and sustainable. This is what creates an Agile brand. I'm your host, Greg Kilstrom, advisor and consultant for Fortune 1000 marketing and CX leaders and teams as principal and chief strategist at GK5A, and best-selling author, keynote speaker, entrepreneur, and Agile certified coach. The Agile Brand podcast is brought to you by TEKsystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world application. For more information, go to teksystems.com. To sign up for the Agile Brand newsletter and get the latest insights and articles on marketing technology and CX, or to purchase a copy of my latest book, House of the Customer, go to gregkilstrom.com. You can also find all my books on Amazon and other retailers. And now on to the show. Today we're going to talk about what it takes to scale a brand while keeping a focus on sustainability. We're also going to talk about scaling while focusing on company values as an agency that supports the growth of brands. To help me discuss these topics, I'd like to welcome Richie Jones, Managing Director at vvast, a D2C e-commerce agency. Richie, welcome to the show.
Hi there, Greg. How you doing? You all right?
Yeah. Things are good. Glad to have you here, and looking forward to talking about this with you. So why don't we get started by you giving a little background on yourself, as well as a little bit about what vvast does.
So thanks, Greg. Yeah. So I've been in e-commerce well over 25 years, which in dog years is probably more like 75, I guess, in terms of e-commerce
Right.
land. I started out in the early days with the digital agency I founded straight out of university, a business called Yucca. That went for 11 years. We sold it to a large AIM-listed network agency, then went private equity board side or brand side for a few years, and then basically spotted this gap in the market where brands were kind of struggling to respond to the needs of the consumer, switching channels to more of a direct-to-consumer, buying directly from the brand kind of model. So that was the kind of the observation and the inspiration for founding vvast a good sort of 6 years ago. And we've built out a really great team and platforms to our business that enable brands to scale in a big way, initially in EMEA, but we're opening up Middle East soon as well. So that's our
Right.
kind of potted history.
Wonderful. So vvast is a B Corp, and you have a focus on both D2C e-commerce growth as well as on sustainability and impact that brands have as they scale. So let's get started by talking about scaling a direct-to-consumer brand while also focusing on reducing impact and making change. So first, to make sure we're all on the same page, can you define what you mean by what is reducing impact, and what are some of the biggest challenges you've seen in your career for brands to overcome there?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a huge challenge. The concept of being, because we work with fashion retail, apparel retail, and obviously that particular part of retail has got a particularly well-known challenge in terms of the kind of pose it threats from an environmental kind of planetary point of view. So what
Yeah.
we're all about really in terms of on our sort of journey to B Corp as we certify, we're looking at this whole mission of, we deploy a playbook with our brands, basically. So our playbook is really aligned with our brands. And what is really amazing with our playbook is it's a brilliant vehicle for us to be able to bring simple, usually quite sort of low risk concepts to market with a brand that enable them to become more sustainable. And I think sustainability is one pillar. We've actually got 3 pillars of how we engage with our brands, but I'll start with sustainability for now. And it might be the simple, obvious ones around being able to present a more efficient or planet-friendly way of shipping to the consumer at point of purchase. So they might choose to either wait longer for a package to arrive from an e-commerce brand, or they might choose to pay a couple of pounds or euros more to have that shipped via more environmentally friendly kind of methods. And by that, I mean, it could be the last mile, could be pedal powered, for example, or electric vehicle powered. So that's one key way we're bringing sustainability about for our brands. I mean, some of the more obvious ones we've done more recently are switching brands out away from single-use plastic in their packaging and using simple compostable packaging as well. Another example would be supporting them with their supply chains. So We had one brand that was manufacturing product in Poland when we first started working with them. Their distribution center is in Amsterdam. In the early stages of us working with them, now that product was actually going via China as a kind of symptom of their kind of supply chain methodology. So we're able to correct that, and I'm now happy to report that that particular product now goes directly on a lorry from Poland to Amsterdam. So there's a great example there of just these funny little glitches in the system that lead to huge amounts of carbon being released when they don't need to. And I think in another area, another pillar where we're sort of engaging, because B Corp also means not just sustainability, it also means the kind of ethical engagement as well. So that's not only with our own teams, but also with how we can support our brands on, we've got another pillar called ethical advertising. And that's looking at, where is the line in terms of the ethics of advertising? I mean, it's a huge, huge question. Can it exist for a start is a great debate to have at a dinner party if you're inclined. But the concept is things like that we might see with certain brands, underage targeting on Instagram. That's something that you can easily cut back on if you want to. Number of times a discount message is being seen by a user, because discount we know is when the consumer's probably at their weakest in terms of buying something they potentially don't need. Maybe having an agreement with the brand where you're saying maybe when you're in sale, which is happy to say with our brands quite rare, the number of times a consumer sees that impression from that ad is only maybe 4 or 5 times versus maybe the usual 10. So these little things that are going to affect behavioral change, which ultimately is what we're trying to affect, are all things that you can sort of bear in mind. And the challenges that we all face is all of our sort of capitalist kind of societies are geared on this relentless year-on-year growth. That's what we're kind of conditioned, to do. And I think there's a kind of an increasing movement, I think, with the B Corp brands increasingly, where it's echoing some of the language we're hearing from some of the people, the economic policy setters out there around thriving economies. So not so much about big incremental year-on-year growth, more around growth that perhaps it's not quite as big as you might have forecasted, but it's growth that's for the better of the consumer and also for the planet. And that's quite a sort of kind of tough sell. And if you bake that in as part of your key brand tenant that the likes of, say, Patagonia have done so wonderfully, that's something that actually resonates with the consumer as well, and is actually an opportunity in itself.
Yeah, I mean, I want to kind of dive a little deeper on that one, because this idea of there's several things that you mentioned. So there's sustainability, there's just general impact, there's the ethics of a brand in general, and these things can seem at odds with this concept of scalability and just growth, and just growth for growth's sake sometimes, but growth of profitability, growth of revenue, all of these things, and growth is important for any business, and there needs to be some type of that for it to sustain and everything like that. But how do you balance these things that seem to be at odds with each other, and yet it sounds like there's some ways to do it well? How do you help brands achieve both of these things?
Yeah, I mean, and I think we're here very much in the place of going. We think we got some ideas, and we're looking for brands, and already so our brands are collaborating with us on the answer to some of these things. And you've got to start somewhere. That's the whole point about the challenges that we face with things like the climate emergency in particular. And I think what we're saying to the brands we're working with is that maybe year one, you might potentially looking, okay, do we reduce year-on-year growth by just 1%, 1 or 2%? There you go, on the top line, but the result might be a better improvement in what your bottom line contribution is as well at the same time. And that might be by deploying, say, ethical advertising methodologies. You're not going to have as big a net to cast, but you also know that you're sending a much more kind of compelling message to the consumer as well. It's quite alien to some of these brands because it's all about growth, especially when you've got the association of, if a brand is on a point where they're looking for additional finance or anything like that, really. But right. Ultimately, because we're ultimately, as a business, we're all about building brand equity. And brand equity actually aligns quite well with the concept of better profit contribution, because you're going to get better margin because you're not selling it at markdown, at the same time as actually garnering consumers that are better for your brand anyway, because they're buying into the methodology of, oh, look, you're running a version of Shopify that is emitting a third of the carbon that your competitors operate, which our websites do. And it's all of those kind of stories start to sort of add up to make the consumer perhaps spend differently and understand why your brand is different. So we're working with brands to bake it in, crucially being able to evidence the changes that we're making. That's the other key thing. And that's the great thing about the B Corp framework. It's all based on evidential key performance metrics, that targets that we're going to try and hit with our own brands. And likewise, the brands can also have themselves. And B Corps attract other B Corps too. So as we attract more B Corps, we'll be in a position where we'll be able to collaborate and become an even more revolutionary ways of, right, okay, let's get really, there might be some guys out there who really want to go for it and push the boundaries of what you can do, with thoughts around growth and what that looks like, really.
Yeah. And so, is this for any brand? I mean, do you think that any brand out there can apply these principles, or, it sounds like some of the examples you gave, it does take a focus to do this, but does it require that singular focus, or, can a brand kind of do this, or at least, transition to that, or, how do you look at it that way?
Yeah, I think it's got to be a gradual transition as well, because we're talking about some sort of fundamental, almost philosophical changes about how we're looking at growth in the future. And we want to avoid shocks. You also want to make sure you don't, literally, you don't want to freak out the brands either. It's all about steady changes, very much like voluntary adoption of certain concepts, but you can't ignore it, especially here in the European Union / UK. Legislation is on the way. By 2025, 2026, a lot of these brands they need to evidence a lot more around their supply chains. They're not going to be able to do certain things that they're doing now as quick as they could do. So in the same way that it feels like how it was with privacy, say 2-3 years ago here in the UK and Europe, it was all about GDPR. In the same way, it's like readying our businesses and our brands for these legislative changes that are coming in terms of how we can evidence how our supply chains work, how we can evidence we're looking after our workforce in a different way, and it's in a way it's kind of being in front of the curve, but by being in front of the curve and starting to start that journey of implementing some of these changes, you're already in front. And there's also there's almost like benefits from a brand point of view to be in front slightly. And I think the big observation I notice as well is that a lot of brands are doing stuff. They're doing some amazing work, but they're almost too scared to talk about it at times. They're hiding from the consumer what some of their concepts they're working on for fear of greenwashing. And I think that's where you can use like the B Corp structure and the way you can evidence the transparency of what you're doing in a really good, brilliant way, because anyone can look up your business on the main sort of B Labs website, look at the score, look at how that score's been allocated and distributed around the kind of scoring criteria they've got. So it's a really transparent way of doing it. I think we'll probably find more brands kind of coming out a bit more about what they're doing, because I think they are holding back for fear of being accused of greenwashing.
Before we continue, let's take a quick break. If you're like many marketing leaders today, you're inundated with a need to improve the customer experience across an increasing number of channels and touch points, all while ensuring your team is performing well, innovating, and continuously improving. So how do you find the time to determine what's next for you, your team, your brand, and your customers? My company, GK5A, can help. Whether it is advisory services, evaluation of marketing technology platforms and solutions, or digital agencies and implementation partners, or assistance with creating strategic roadmaps and prioritization of efforts, we've done it all and served as an ally to Fortune 1000 brands in industries like financial services, healthcare, consumer electronics, professional services, and more. You can learn more about these services and contact us at www.gk5a. That's www.gk5a.com. Now let's get back to the show. Yeah, and it's interesting. You mentioned the example of GDPR with consumer data privacy. For those less familiar with that, I know there's also. It seems like the EU and UK are a bit ahead of the curve on a number of these things. I know even with AI regulation, there's more and more talk and some action on that, and certainly well ahead of here in the United States. But can you give some examples of this type of growth, this scalability matched with sustainability. Can you give an example of this type of growth and from a brand you've worked with?
Yeah, well, I mean, the ones we're just starting on in terms of our sort of discussions around with a VF brand, Jansport, that we work with, and
Yeah.
they've just through VF's really great corporate social responsibility they've been doing anyway. I mean, they've been first movers on discussions around, they had pride baked into their trade plan years ago, long before it became like a thing in terms of a retail moment. And
Yeah.
I think honestly, from a sort of sustainability and supply chain point of view, those guys out of all the brands we work with are probably the most forward thinking. Also, and it's brilliant to work with a brand that is engaging with, their core customer often is a youth college goer, and particularly vulnerable group as well. And their stuff they do around mental health is absolutely amazing. And I think the being able to apply that with the ethics part of B Corp is particularly useful. And I think that's a really good example. And I think some of the other brands we've got on our books, so Stance is a good example where we work with them to switch out their sustainable packaging and get that, and also their 2.0, which we call it, version of their website that went live this last week, is built on our latest Shopify theme called Vastify 2.0, and that's the one that saves all this carbon in terms of how page load works and some of the technical sort of behind the scenes stuff works. The user doesn't need to download anything like the amount of data they used to have to on the version one of that website. So those are great examples. And then I always cite, because I actually think the biggest challenge we've got is the behavioral change piece. And I always cite, the classic Patagonia campaign of don't buy this jacket.
Right.
That goes so counter to everything. And also them coming out most recently around, oh, by the way, we're not sustainable. And this concept of retail, any form of retail can't be truly sustainable because you're still actually utilizing and burning, Earth's resource to facilitate the production of anything really. So I think Patagonia, like those massive trailblazers of that thinking of almost anti-consumption, but the concept of you're still selling a quality product that is going to last for 10, 15 years versus something that's not as good and isn't going to be repairable is the big kind of thinking on that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so, I wanted to switch gears a little bit, talk about scaling maybe from a different perspective. And so, whether you're a direct to consumer brand or an agency like yours, growing a profitable business while growing talent and building the type of employee experience that makes people want to stay and help the organization grow, it certainly takes a lot of focus and effort as well. So you've characterized this as being purpose-led and a purpose-led business focused on transparency and communicating values. So I personally know I used to run an agency, sold about 6 years ago now. So I know some of these challenges of running an agency with competing priorities, competitive pressures, changing needs of clients. How do you make sure being purpose-led continues to be a part of that despite all of these competing priorities?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think, ultimately you need profit in the business and sound commercial objectives
Right.
to be able to deliver on the purpose. That's really important. So again, with the B Corp process, it really, fortunately, we looked at our fundamental kind of overarching mission statement as a business 18 months ago now, which has been embedded into the business really wonderfully. And off the back of that, that's then led into our company values as well. And it's so interesting. Probably the last 4 or 5 latest employees that have joined us, new starter wise, have all said, we joined this business and we could have gone to any of your competitors, or, we're up against some pretty good heavyweights here in Bristol, UK, in terms of the tech scene, especially on the sort of developer side. So attracting talent to the business is really vital to us. And they've all said it's because we're on this journey, this purpose-led journey. It's really obvious. We've got a clear mission statement that is then fed into this really entrepreneurial value statement that sits underneath our kind of company mission. I mean, our company mission is we build long-term brand equity by leveraging exceptional teams and technology. And that really says it all. We're trying to empower our teams with the best tech, but with purpose baked into that tech. And that, you mentioned AI just a second ago, having ethical code and an actual policy and ethical code is going to be absolutely crucial with brands in particular as we go forward into this AI driven age. And I think the emergency side of things around sustainability is one thing, but where we really are coming into it, as we all know, the world is going to be very different within years. And I think having an ethics code that's attached to that is really important. And it means a lot to the team. Our core value is relentless R&D, and we really hold that up as a statement in that we always want to learn from things that work and crucially from things that don't work. Having that open, collaborative culture. One of our other values is "Come as you are," which is a deliberate rip-off of the Nirvana lyric. and
Yeah.
when we did that to make people feel open and welcome, and we've actually, don't have a dress code. No way would we have a dress code. It's just really all about that sort of open, collaborative environment where some of the best outcomes happen, and that's seems to work really well with our team, and that's seems to be what incentivizes them and love coming to work, basically, which is what we want.
Yeah, yeah. And so, with values and there's a few aspects of them, right? There's the communication of values, and then there's the living those values and being transparent about, what is aspirational versus what is, something that you're currently strong in as a company, as an agency, whatever the case may be. You mentioned greenwashing, a bit ago about, the environmental and sustainable impact. I don't know that there's a color to associate with this, but you often see brands and hiring an agency, for instance, again, having been in those shoes before. Every company has those things that they say, well, this is what we believe and everything. But, how do you transcend that? Of definitely you need to communicate those and put those out there. But how do you transcend that and really live the values and make sure that you're living up to those, even though I'm sure there's better days and and worse days? How do you try to do that as a leader and an agency owner?
Yeah, well, I mean, we bring it to light. I mean, we've got a HR platform that's called Breathe that we track all of our team performance on in a good way, and
Yeah.
all of the objectives we set within the business are set against our 5 core company values, and yeah, and we basically will hold up in the monthly meeting, especially we have the all hands meeting we run, a great example of where someone has just extolled the values that we've got in the business. Because we're quite surf related, the prize they win is actually a 3D printed gold shaka, hand making a shaka sign, which
Nice.
it's a bit of fun, but it's the whole idea is that that person then has they demonstrated great collaboration, or for Planet Community is another one we've got, and I think our model is actually performance based. So we work on a percentage of the revenue we generate for our brands. And with that, because we tend to bring US brands into Europe, with that comes a
Yeah.
huge amount of guardianship. And we have another value, which is brand first, revenue second. And that sounds quite perverse or counter again to the concept, but it's all about thinking of putting the brand first. It's so important. So and it might be around, if there's anything we're not too sure about, we might hesitate about something, just double checking it with the brand first before you do it. Because some of the brands we work with, they don't have boots on the ground here in Europe. They are relying on us to look after the brand. They can't see it, everything we're doing. So there's this incredible feeling in the business. And if it doesn't happen often, I'm happy to say, but if there's been something goes wrong, sometimes there's tears in the team. They're that upset. And that's obviously what we're
Yeah.
looking to avoid at all costs. But that passion and love for what they do, and genuine passion and belief that they want to just look after the brands is something that kind of blows me away all the time.
Yeah.
It's actually really, it's quite humbling, if that makes sense. You create this team culture where people care that much.
Yeah.
Yeah, it lives and breathes through, through the HR platforms, but day in, day out, we try and make sure we reference our values and coming back to some of the key things that we believe as a business. And that's on me to just sort of shine a light on when people are excelling on that front. But I honestly think I just think that as we're in the scale up phase of what we're doing now, especially, it's more important than ever that we hold on to these values, and it shows in our work, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's great to hear, and it's great to hear that it's not just some values written on a wall somewhere that people walk by and then they do their work, right? So it's nice to see that kind of holistic way of approaching that and even measuring it, and that brings me to next question, which is just how do you measure success in being purpose led? You mentioned measuring success against values. I think that's a great way to really demonstrate that you're walking the walk, so to speak. But how do you measure overall success as a business in this approach?
Yeah. So I mean, in our B Corp application, we've had to attach KPIs to the three pillars that I identified earlier. And I think if you just take
Mm,
ethical advertising, for example, we're setting out a reduction potentially in well, not even potentially a reduction in year on year advertising impressions that we pump out into the market that are related to markdown, for example. So that's one example of where less people will see a message that's going to make them likely to act in a way that could be buying something they don't need.
mm,
A product that could end up in landfill, or worse still, be returns. Like, returns are dreadful for the
mm,
planet. So that's one example. So we'll be able to evidence the number of millions of impressions that we've reduced related to markdown. Another one will be examples of where we're actually encouraging brands to hit targets around the full price markdown mix that they might have in a full year. And it's the thing that we
yeah.
now track in our business intelligence tool that we built ourselves called Vast BI. It actually tracks the full price markdown mix by brand, by day, by week, by year. And that's something that we report on with the brands now, usually in a monthly, just saying, just so you know, we're usually way behind our usual markdown mix. We're able to evidence with one brand that year on year markdown mix had come down by sort of 30%. That's a huge reduction.
Mm,
That means there's less going out to the market that, again, it's staying away from that sort of behavioral activity where people are buying stuff they don't need. So those are
mm,
sort of key ways. Another way is that we can evidence the amount of carbon that we've reduced either with our own travel, but also with supplier miles. We've changed that Poland example I referenced earlier. So all these things are genuinely KPIable and trackable as the year goes through. Our operations director, as part of her role, is that she tracks where are we in that sort of journey. And we will transparently share it as well as part of the kind of B Corp that we do, what we've actually achieved against that purpose-led piece. Another really obvious one is on our community engagement piece, we give away just over a month's worth of the team's time to local charities and NGOs, and just being able to evidence that work is also a great way where we're reaching out. Likewise, with our higher education reach out stuff we do as well, where we're just trying to help local universities. We bring students into the business, all those kind of things that we can all evidence that we're being purpose led, and genuinely are being purpose led. It's not just even evidencing it; we're actually living it. That's the key thing.
yeah, yeah. No, that's great stuff. Well, Richie, thanks so much for joining the show. I got one last question before we wrap up here. So, kind of going back to those brands, that a brand that needs to scale, but yet they want to be more sustainable as they scale. What would be your advice to them as they navigate the months ahead?
Oh, I love this question. Right. So the big thing is get, especially with a D2C brand or whatever, get the e-commerce team to talk to the overarching ethics slash marketing or C-suite leadership. That's the key thing, because often forecasts are set in silos,
Yeah.
or by CFO who's not necessarily thinking about perhaps a purpose-led mission the business is on. I still see so many B Corps going out with messaging around, oh, look, our sustainable supply chain has improved, or look at this, look at the, yeah, absolutely brilliant. They're showcasing the work they're doing, but then 2 days later, sending a markdown message, 50% off,
Yeah.
and might be new season or whatever, because they're chasing a number. And that's the e-commerce team chasing a number that goes counter to the overarching mission and values of the business, because they've got to chase that number. And look, I'm not judging. It's just some of these brands are in that transition we talked about. So they might still be switching over. That number might have been set 2 years ago, in a finance pack by the CFO with the shareholders. We don't know. But ultimately getting those teams to all talk together in a purpose led way, in a seamless way, to make sure that everything stacks up is so important, because I do see it all the time where there's that conflict, between the brand mission, what it actually stands for, versus trade tactics that we know are going to be planet damaging. That's the big thing for me. And the one bit of advice, and all respect, we're all on this journey. No one has the answers fully yet. So that's what I'd say.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I love what you're doing for brands and for your own agency. Again, I'd like to thank Richie Jones, Managing Director at Vast, for joining the show. You can learn more about Richie and Vast by following the links in the show notes. Thanks again for listening to the Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom podcast, brought to you by Tech Systems. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to subscribe on your podcast channel of choice and leave us a rating so that others can find the show more easily. You can access more episodes of the show at www.gregkihlstrom.com. That's GREGKIHLSTROM.com. To get a copy of my latest book, House of the Customer, visit my website, or you can find it on Amazon or other retailers. The Agile Brand is produced by Missing Link, a Latina-owned, strategy-driven, creatively fueled production co-op. From ideation to creation, they craft human connections through intelligent, engaging, and informative content. Until next time, stay agile.